the USDA Bioenergy CAP funding that we received in 2010, and I'll talk more about just the social side of it, where we are actually focusing on other aspects of bioenergy also. I'd like to start with first saying that this is not my work, but the work of my PhD and master's student, whose names you would actually see on this first slide here, Robert Radix. He's been working on this project for the past year and a half, and Priscilla Morris, who's a master's student, has also been working on this for 1 year now. And my colleague, Dr. Steve Kelly, who is the head of the department also here at NC State for the Department of Forest Biomaterials, is an ally in this, and we are both working with the students to get this research forward. So going ahead, let me talk a little bit about the premise, the basic premise on which my presentation today is based on. And this is basically, you might have seen a figure similar to this when we talk about sustainability. So when I talk about the factors affecting product success in the marketplace, normally the success of any product or even any project basically first requires to be technically feasible. That is, the technology needs to be there to facilitate the product's commercial success. However, in addition, for the product or the project to be successful, it needs to also show promise of being economically viable, ecologically sustainable, as well as socially acceptable. So if you've been following the bioenergy or the biofuels industry for the past 20 years or so, you must have seen that there's a lot of emphasis on the technical feasibility, which is actually really important, as we talked about. Everything is based on that. However, you must have also seen that there is focus on the economical part of it, which is tremendously important. The ecological sustainability, which is the environmental side of it. However, only very recently we have started focusing and looking at the social acceptable part of the project, of any product, and especially in relationship to bioenergy. So this is the area that I'm going to talk about today in this webinar. So as I spoke earlier, past studies on bioenergy have majorly focused on technical barriers, but the socioeconomic barriers are important too. How does the public really perceive the entire bioenergy industry, as well as the fuel market? Or, if we go into bioenergy, it could be the pellet market. But today I'm mostly focusing on the biofuel side of it for transportation. The economic issues, these include market forces such as consumer acceptance that would affect demand of bioenergy. And so there have been studies that basically show that consumer acceptance would really facilitate how the bioenergy is basically utilized in the marketplace. And so it is a very important part of the barriers that needs to be taken a look at. There are very few comprehensive studies that focus on the social barriers so far, and the studies that have been published basically are clearly very fragmented, and the reasons for that are 3 basic reasons. There's the first one, it is very limited in terms of the geography where the focus has been in published studies. We see that Europe is studied quite extensively in past studies on social barriers. As we already know, in Europe, the bio-based energy has been in existence for quite a long time. We also know that there are differences in the green or environmental aspects of energy, how that is accepted in the culture and society. It's highly embedded in the European culture, whereas if we look at North America, and in particular the US, we are still very new in terms of moving towards green or environmental aspect of energy. And this is just relative to Europe. Across the U.S. also, we see that there are few studies that have focused on social and market aspects, and they are limited to either a small town or a county, and in a couple cases have included areas where pilot plants have been started or are planned. And so there are very few studies that have looked at an overall how the public really perceives this area in bioenergy. Most of the studies also include one particular stakeholder group, most likely either a small number of industry personnel or farm landowners or forest landowners. But there are very few studies that have focused on studying each of the stakeholder groups and compared and contrasted them as a whole to look at how their perception is and in bioenergy and biomass. The other thing that limits our understanding of the societal understanding is the use of convenience sample of stakeholders in past studies. So normally past studies have looked at very small sample sizes that make the generalization to the total population very difficult as well as inappropriate. I would like to also note another point that you would see the last point in there about the integrated social, economic, environmental, and political aspects not studied together. In this point, I would just like to say that the past studies focus primarily either on the technical or the economic aspect or the environmental aspect, but the relative importance of each of these aspects taken together, how each of these attributes compare with each other and contribute to the overall understanding from the stakeholders' perspective is not very prevalent in any study. So we are actually trying to focus on all of these different aspects that we have found in the past studies in this particular study. So the objective of this study is to measure key stakeholder perceptions of bio-based energy, and here we are looking at the environment versus the feedstock economics, impact on overall on the society as well as policy, all these different attributes. And once the perceptions are measured, the idea is to determine the key information gaps and to determine the content for the development of educational and communication tools by targeting each of the specific stakeholder segments. So if we know that there is a particular knowledge gap or information gap for a particular stakeholder group, we can target that group and create educational or communication tools that is specifically for that stakeholder segment. Moving on to the next slide, this study is a part of the Southeast Partnership for Integrated Supply Systems, which we call IBIS, and this is funded by the U.S. Department of Agriculture through its Agriculture and Food Research Initiative grants to help meet the USDA goal of producing almost 50% of the next generation of biofuels in the Southeast U.S. This partnership is between universities, federal laboratories, industry partners, and others to address the complexity of sustainable biofuel production and to highlight some of the real world situations to this complexity. So we are not only focused on optimizing the development, production, and logistics of feedstocks, which include herbaceous feedstocks as well as woody crops, but we are also looking at overcoming the barriers to biofuels deployment in the society with plans for education, outreach, and extension. So within this project, we are actually focusing on the social side or the societal aspects. If we focus on the societal aspects, whatever few studies we could lay our hands on, these studies have basically looked at each, the stakeholder groups, and based on our literature review, we found that the perception basically of the society really depends on the stakeholder group themselves. So what stakeholder group we are targeting. That's an important part because every stakeholder group has different stakes. That's why they're called stakeholders, and they have different stakes, and therefore their perceptions and their acceptance will differ based on what their stakes are, how they are, what kind of benefits they can get from this particular from this particular industry, or what could be some of the threats that they perceive from this particular industry. So it depends on what stakeholder group we are looking at, the area or the region that where we are actually collecting the data from. The timing is also important, and timing is kind of related to the market maturity, whether the market is mature in terms of the growth of the bioenergy industry and how it's whether it's commercially successful or not. So Europe versus U.S. When we think about that, the Europe is a more mature market, whereas the U.S. is still like kind of in its nascent stage. The perception studies from the past have shown that price sensitivity really affects market acceptance. So what is the price of the product, and how the public really perceives the change in price, so whether the volume of demand basically changes with respect to price or not, and how much it changes, that's really something that affects market acceptance. So economics will play a major part when we think about the bioenergy industry. And that's we see that the past studies have focused on that also, and the general public as well as some of the stakeholders are also thinking that that's important. The potential resources and expected market effects are local, and what this means is that it's important that we look at at a broad sense, we look at what the general public really thinks about the market, or their perceptions or acceptance of the market in general. However, we also need to focus on the local aspect, because locally, one area could be different from the other, and so the public perceptions might differ based on that. And so, definitely, the communities, going to local communities and getting data from there is an important aspect of it. We also find that there is a significant lack of social measurement standards. So there is no real standard with which we can, we know these are the different aspects of, or the societal impacts that we should be looking at. And so one aspect of our study deals with looking at the social life cycle impact assessment, and we are looking at different stakeholders there. It's basically a branch off of this study that we are looking at, and Dr. Robert Barden is working on it also, and he's looking at the how can we measure over the life cycle of a product like the energy product or biofuels, how do we measure this socially, and what kind of measurement standards we can create. But today we've found that there is a lack of social measurement standard. Market acceptance requires innovation in education, and that's true. After we've seen what kind of gaps there are in the marketplace, targeting each of these different segments of the population with some innovative educational opportunity or innovative educational tool is going to be really important for market acceptance. So these are all lessons learned from past studies. Moving on, I'd like to talk more about what our approach is towards understanding the societal perceptions of bioenergy. And so the bioenergy products, to understand these, for the range of bioenergy products, we need to look at different type of stakeholders. So in this study, we are focusing on, not only the suppliers in the industry that you see in the middle, but also the feedstock producers, the forest and farmland owners, the consumers and local communities of and so the general consumers as well as the local communities in places where the plants are in existence, or some of the bioenergy plants are planned, the researchers and academia, the investor population, as well as the government and non-government organizations. All of these different stakeholder groups are important, and knowing or understanding their perceptions is likely to give us an understanding of where they stand in terms of the bioenergy industry. So next, I would like to focus on data collection from the stakeholder groups. If I can go back to the earlier slide, I would like to indicate that we are currently focusing on the feedstock producers, that is the forest and farmland users, owners, and the consumers. So far in our study, we have collected data from the feedstock producers and the consumers, and we are starting to look at the local communities. When I talked about the social LCA, that's what we are looking at. And following these this data collection and this analysis, we're going to start looking at the investors, the government, the suppliers, and the researchers. So, so today I'm going to talk more about just the feedstock producers, the data collected from there, and the consumers, the consumer population. So the data collection was done from the two stakeholder groups that I talked about, was done using surveys. So for the consumer and landowner stakeholder groups, the data was collected in different ways. The surveys were done differently, and I'll focus on them in the next, on the data collection for each of the groups in the next slide. We started with pilot testing of the surveys and did a pilot test with 32 consumers or general public and 19 forest and farmland owners to make sure that we have the right type of data that we are collecting, the questionnaire size is right, that each of the questions can be are easy to understand, and so on. We had, by November, we actually had a total of 305 completed surveys of the general public in North Carolina, and we have started data collection in Tennessee. As you know, the study of the focus of our study is the Southeastern U.S., and given our funding, we could not target all the entire region of entire Southeastern region, so all the states, but we feel that North Carolina and Tennessee, given the type of feedstock that grows, that these can be models that we can replicate in Southeast, and these would be representative of the entire population of the Southeastern U.S. So my student told me today that we've finished data collection in Tennessee, and in total we have, including North Carolina and Tennessee, we have close to 600 completed surveys. And we have, by end of November, we had about 238 completed surveys of forest and farmland owners in North Carolina, and as of today, I know that we have about 150 surveys from Tennessee, from forest and farmland owners in Tennessee. I'm only going to present the 305, the analysis from the 305 completed surveys of the general public and 238 in North Carolina, because that's the only analysis we could have done so far. And so going into the consumer surveys, the instrument that we used is an electronic survey, so basically email survey. We had contacted a third party, a very well-known third party consumer panel that had a database of all the consumers in North Carolina, and we basically got a reduced database or a sample, a randomized sample of the population of North Carolina from them, from all across the geography and different demographics. The sampling, we had randomly selected the consumers to contact, and today I'm going to talk about 305 completed surveys. The response rate was 0.66%, which is actually low, but for consumer surveys, this is pretty typical. So looking at the demography, we have about 55% males and 45% females in our respondents, and here's the income distribution, and you could actually see that you can see that it's pretty well distributed, but we also see that the percentage of the respondents that belong to our survey are a little bit more, have a little bit higher income than we would normally find across the Southeastern U.S. So among 35 different types of questions that we had for the respondents, here's one of the responses to the amount of, or the gallons of fuel purchased per week by the consumers, and across, as you would see, almost about 2% indicated that they do not buy fuel on their own, but then somebody else buys for them. But we have right around 37 to 38% of the respondents that buy between 10 and less than 20 gallons per week. So moving on to more interesting stuff here, we asked about some general topics and to the consumers, and looked at whether respondents were concerned on a 5-point scale of not at all worried to extremely worried about some general topics, that included energy and unemployment and climate change, about the general environment, and so on. And what we find on the top is among the different statements that we had in there, the U.S. dependence on foreign oil is definitely something of concern. The price of transportation fuels is also something that is of concern to the individuals, to the respondents. Followed by general unemployment, price of energy, and rural unemployment. You would see that most of these statements are important to the respondents, so they all have over 3 over the neutral. They're mostly over the neutral category, and so most of them were kind of worried about all of these different statements. But on the top, you would see is the price for transportation fuels and U.S. dependence on foreign oil. When asked about the feedstock preference, on whether they would be willing to purchase biofuels for transportation from a particular type of feedstock based on all these different types of feedstocks that you see here. The one that came to the top was from crop residues. So about 84% of the respondents indicate they would be willing to purchase biofuels for transportation from crop residues, as well as 82% indicated from wood manufacturing residues and 81% from grasses. So those were the top 3. And corn, which is the major feedstock that is utilized today for biofuels, is right around 65% of consumers from corn. You would also see that there's another histogram in here, or about never heard of biofuels from this source. So respondents were asked if they had heard about biofuels from a particular source or not, and about the highest in there is genetically modified trees and algae duckweed, which is actually not very surprising to us. So about 17% of respondents indicated that they had never heard about biofuels from genetically modified trees. 17% also indicated that they had never heard of biofuels from algae and duckweed. About 12% from forest residues and trees, and of course 2% from corn, so most of them had heard about biofuels from corn. Moving on, we asked respondents about what type of factors do you influences your choice of biofuels from extremely unimportant to extremely important on that 5-point scale. And there were a list of right around 38 different types of statements on biofuels, and different types of different aspects of biofuels, related to economics, the environment, policy, vehicle compatibility, utilization, and so on and so forth. And so you would see on the top there is the top factor that would influence the choice of biofuel for the respondents is my vehicle's compatibility with biofuel. The second one is biofuel will not change the lifetime of the engine. As you can see, both of them talk about vehicle compatibility and how the performance of the vehicles could change because of biofuels. And so those two are really, really important for the respondents or for the general consumers. And so we definitely need to focus on educating them on that. The third and fourth one, as you would see, there's a tie between the second on the second most important statement, and the price of biofuels as well as the biofuel will not change the performance of the engine. Again, the same thing as the first two that we actually saw earlier. Moving on, the last few statements out of the 38 statements actually, no. This is a different part of the questionnaire, and here we asked different types of agreement questions on on different types of biofuel statements. So again, we had about 40 different types of biofuel statements, and based on these different statements, we asked the respondents to indicate their agreement on a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 indicates strongly agree and 1 indicates strongly disagree and 5 indicates strongly agree. And again, kind of the same things come to the top. Before I would purchase biofuels, I would like more information about how they would affect my vehicle. This is the same thing as the earlier one. I believe using landfill wastes could be a valuable source of bioenergy is the second most important one. We also wanted to test and look at people's knowledge about the current blending of E10 ethanol at gas stations, and it seems that most of the respondents know about it. I believe that grasses can be used for producing biofuel. That also got was on the top in terms of the agreement. And then I would like my local power provider to use renewable fuel sources. That was also on the top. And on the bottom, among the 40 statements, we actually, the last one was, I believe that the government will provide me more credible information about biofuels than the biofuel industry. So really, I think the word government was something that probably people felt negative about. I trust the government to give me credible information about biofuels, so those were kind of at the bottom. I think biofuels made from grasses will cause groceries to be more expensive, so that was, again, among the bottom 3. Moving on, I wanted to kind of show you about some of the open-ended comments. So we had a space in our survey for some open-ended comments from the consumers, and we had several comments from the consumers that were very interesting, but I put right around 7 here for you that you could see. Great ideas for wind, solar, and biodiesel will reduce the need for Arab oil. I think if it is cheaper than gas and your car runs the same, people will buy it. Somebody says, I have older cars, 10% ethanol is all they can handle without damage. Using corn increases food prices. I strongly oppose taking up land use for agricultural purposes to grow biofuel. I support using waste and non-food plants, but not trees. We need them to pull CO2 from the atmosphere. We have oil, a lot of oil, drill it and use it, sell it to the world. So you could see what the public sentiment is currently about the use of about the whole bioenergy industry and biofuels for transportation in particular. So I wanted to give you a little bit of flavor about the open-ended questions. And these are really great to look, when we look at these about understanding, what the consumers really are thinking and feeling. And so at some point we're going to categorize these and see which ones come to the top in terms of what the consumers really feel. Moving on to the next stakeholder group, forest and farmland owner surveys. Basically, we collected data on a mail survey from the forest and farmland owners, and the reason for that is, of course, we've found from past research that electronic surveys somehow doesn't work with the forest and farmland owners. And with the mail surveys, we actually received a pretty good response rate. So we had randomly selected right around 25 counties from North Carolina from the different regions, as well as most of them were in the rural counties, but from each of the 3 regions of North Carolina, the Piedmont, the coastal, and the mountains. And so we randomly selected and sent mail surveys to around 3,000, a little bit less than 3,000 forest and farmland owners, and received about 135 completed surveys from the forest landowners and 103 from the farmland owners. The response rate was 9.4% for forest landowners and 7% for farmland owners. Our response rate is actually considerably higher for the farm and forest landowners from Tennessee. Moving on, looking at some of the demographics. The land area owned by respondents by percentage of landowners, and the blue bars represent the farm landowners and the green bars represent the forest landowners. So most of the forest landowners own right around about 50 to 100, or I should rather say about 31 to 100 acres in land area, and the farm landowners right around 30% own about between 50 and 100 acres, and about 25% 26% own about 10 to 30 acres of forest land. Of farmland. Moving on to other landowner demographics, we asked them about the primary type of forest land that they owned, and to the forest landowners, and as you would see, about 43% own mixed hardwood and pine type of forest lands, 13% natural hardwood, 33% planted pine, 6% natural pine, 1% planted hardwood, and 4% other. To the farm landowners, about 24% grow soybeans, 21% corn, 24% hay, and so on. And the rest of the percentages are between tobacco, wheat, sweet potato, and other types of farm crops. Looking at what type of crops they're interested to grow or supply for bioenergy, the forest landowners indicated mostly softwoods, especially given that this is the southeastern part of the U.S. That was something that was expected. Mixed pine and hardwoods, about 26% of the landowners indicated that they would be interested to supply that. About 13% indicated short rotation woody crops, but I would like to say that they also, most of these folks also indicated that they would like to know more about growing short rotation woody crops for bioenergy purposes, so that's something that information that they're looking for. Moving on to the next, to the second graph right here, the farmland owners, about most of them indicated growing soybean, trees, and corn. I mean, it was interesting to see that about 14% have indicated growing trees in the farmlands, which is actually pretty good. The first genetically modified, I'm actually really missing, because of the formatting, I'm missing the genetically modified. The first one is genetically modified crops, and then the second one is genetically modified trees. Moving on, we asked about the awareness of the forest and farmland owners for different types of bioenergy sources or feedstocks, are basically sources, and it included corn, used cooking oil, and so on and so forth, like these different types of sources that you see out here. And the reddish brownish bars are the forest landowners, and the bluish bars are the farmland owners. And so about more than 60%, about 62% of forest landowners are aware of bioenergy from corn. That sounds a little bit low to me, but that's what our survey showed, and about 48% are aware of corn for bioenergy. And that again, sounds very low to me, but that's what we actually found. About more than 52% indicated used cooking oil as a source of bioenergy by the forest landowners, and about 44% indicated used cooking oil for the farm landowners, indicated being aware of the used cooking oil as a bioenergy source. And you can kind of go through and look at the forest landowners that are more are aware about agricultural crop residues as source of bioenergy, and less of the farmland owners. So again, some of this was pretty interesting to us because we had really not expected that. Again, we had right around 38 different types of bioenergy and biofuel for transportation statements related to economics, environment, production, policy issues, and so on for the forest and farmland owners. And we asked them to indicate their agreement on on a scale of 1 to 5, where 5 indicates strongly agree, and 1 indicates strongly disagree. And here's the mean and the standard deviation for each of the statements. And on the top, the statement was, in my opinion, biofuel production could increase the demand for wood. So that was something that came out to the top. And actually there were 35 statements and not 38, 35 different statements. The second one is, in my opinion, using pre-commercial thinning in forest lands for energy is a potential income opportunity, so they are interested in pre-commercial thinning. a local bioenergy plant or facility would improve the employment in my local region. In my opinion, domestically produced fuel is critical to the national security and so on. So those were the top 4. And then at the end you would see the last one is I have sought professional advice for growing woody crops for bioenergy. So not a lot of them have actually sought out advice for growing woody biomass. For the farmland owners, we asked them on an agreement about 27 different biofuel and bioenergy agreement statements, and on the same scale from 1 to 5, where 5 indicates strongly agree and 1 indicates strongly disagree. Here are the list of the statements that came out at the top. Number 1 is, in my opinion, biofuel production could increase the demand for agricultural crops and residues. So with a mean of 4.04 and a standard deviation of 0.04. In my opinion, domestically produced fuel is critical to the national security. This is also, came out in the top 4 for the forest landowners. The cost of growing biomass for energy is more than the returns for the market, so it's really not profitable according to them for now. Current government regulations and policies are not helpful for me to grow and supply agricultural crops and residues for bioenergy. That was on the top 4. That was the 4th one. The last one is, for them that they disagreed on is, I'm worried that bioenergy produced from agricultural crops will have a negative environmental impact. So they do not think that it will have a negative environmental impact. And also, similar to that of the forest landowners, I have sought professional advice about growing agricultural crops for energy. That also came down at the bottom. We asked the forest and farmland owners about the barriers for producing feedstocks, and you would see that I'm actually missing some information on the top. Again, this is basically lack of information on production, and so that it should be lack of information on production, and that came out as the top barrier. So they really do not have information on production for agricultural, using agricultural crops or trees or other types of feedstocks. Site issues came out to be the next one. So maybe the site is not conducive for growing feedstocks for bioenergy purposes. So you would see that there were only 67 farmland owners that responded to this question, about 101 forest landowners. Then forest landowners also indicated not enough land area. We didn't get anything from the farmland owners on that particular, so 0% of farmland owners indicated that. Lack of finance or startup cost was the next one for forest landowners, but farmland owners were high on lack of knowledge on economics, which is also similar to the startup cost, but also similar to the finance. So they're both concerned about economics in the market. And then the other here indicates family, that their land is either, used by the family for other types of purposes, or the family refuses to use it for feedstocks purposes. They rent the land out or getting old timber out. That was what this other thing was. So so for the forest landowners, getting the old timber out was one of the barriers. Moving on, what kind of incentives are these forest and farmland owners looking for to grow and produce for the bioenergy industry? And specifically, we asked for biofuels for transportation. And the first one that came out at the top is profit more than current use. So that basically, again, kind of points us to the same direction of economics, and the fact that currently the economics really don't make sense for them to actually grow or produce for feedstocks for the bioenergy purposes. Cost share program or financing is something that they are looking for. So most of the forest and farmland owners that, mostly this is true with the forest landowners, they indicated that they are looking for some kind of cost share program or financing from government or investors in order to start growing or producing for bioenergy, for the bioenergy industry. We had, for the farmland owners, you would see the 2 top ones are either they don't know or have lack of information, or tax incentives, or tax incentives and subsidies that are really, really important. So one of the incentives that they are looking for is, tax breaks or tax incentives or some kind of subsidy, which is also true for the forest landowners. Right around 15% of them indicated, that they are looking for that. This other here includes national need or family opinion, and we're missing a little bit of the family opinion. So that's basically, it depends on their family opinion. If the family really thinks that that they should grow and produce for bioenergy, they'll go for it. And this is my last slide. So I would like to conclude with what we basically found, mostly for the general public and the forest landowners. So the general public is mostly concerned about how biofuels for transportation really would affect their vehicle and the price of the biofuels. And so, in several of these questions, it seemed what really came out was the fact that they are very much worried about how the performance of their vehicle is going to be with the use of biofuels if that was something that they were to use. Also shows some distrust of the government sources of information, but it could be just that the word government is something that they are worried about. They are happy to work with the extension folks. I mean, that's something that came out with the open-ended responses. They're also bipolar in their opinion of bioenergy industry, and we found out this from the comments. So either some are very, very positive or some are very, very negative. We really found very few that were kind of in the middle or were neutral about the industry. If you look at the landowners, they believe domestic fuel production is very critical for national security. So of course, we want to make sure that that's something, if we really want to promote the bioenergy industry and want acceptance from the landowners, then this is something that needs to be, that this is critically, important to them, and this should be specified, in promotions and in education. They also believe that government policies are not conducive for growing and producing crops. This is also obtained from this is also true, and we found it from the open-ended comments that we got. In addition to better economics, they're also interested in cost share programs or tax incentives in order to participate in the bioenergy industry. To conclude with, I would like to thank the USDA Department of Agriculture, the National Institute of Food and Agricultural Grant, for giving us the money to support the graduate students and support this work. Our IBIS partners, the Bioenergy CAP partners across Washington State, Penn State, and University of Minnesota. John, I know John is also in this among the audience. So John and Sarah are working at the USDA Southern Research Station on something similar, but they are working at a more in-depth and at the community level. And so I'd like to thank you for your inputs on our questionnaire and talking to us. And then the NC Forestry Association and Loggers Association, the graduate students, the department, and the survey respondents. So with that, I would like to take any questions that you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Sudipta. Great presentation. Really appreciate all the work that you're doing for the industry and trying to identify these barriers. What do we need to do? What do consumers want, and what do the people that are going to be producing the feedstocks want? So I do have here on the chat window that we have about 10 minutes for questions. So if you please type in your question, I can ask Sudipta. So does anybody have any questions? I had a question, Sudipta. Give everybody a chance while they're thinking of some questions from the presentation. And I was kind of curious because I guess maybe a lot of the consumers were from an urban setting, and then I guess the other respondents were from forest landowners from a rural setting. Do you think maybe attitudes differ between those two settings? Were you able to distinguish that?
We do have the zip codes for the consumers, but we have not done any zip code analysis yet. So I'm not, I don't know if this is all coming from just the urban sources or rural sources, but we did a random sample across North Carolina. So I would think, that we may not really have that kind of a difference. But again, I don't think we have done any zip code analysis as yet, but we need to do that, the geographic analysis for the consumers. But of course, what you see from the landowners, that's mostly, I would say 99% coming from the rural rural side. So I don't know if, at this point to tell you whether it's all rural for the consumers. Probably not, most probably not. But once we do the zip code analysis, we can actually really see what we have in there.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to look at. Just, I mean, a lot of similarities between the two groups, but I mean, there was some differences. It seemed like going through your presentation.
Yeah, I mean, I think the consumers at this point are mostly worried about utilization. How are we going to use this, and if we really have to use biofuels, how is that going to affect my vehicle? So they're really worried about utilization issues. I think from the forest, and the farm landowners' perspective, of course, they are mostly thinking about growing or production and supplying of this biomass, which is their stake, within the bioenergy industry, and so they are, it's not surprising that they are worried about the economics, or what the returns from the market is, or they're interested in learning more about these different aspects of the economics or the production, and we also saw, for the forest landowners about the short rotation woody crops. So some of the findings we had were surprising, but some were pretty slam dunk, I think.
So we're waiting on more questions here. So it seemed like the vehicle performance was a major issue, and I believe that most new models are compatible with these new biofuels. Is that correct?
It depends on what type of models they have, and so I would think that, especially the auto industry at least, takes notice of this, and they come out, or they think about producing vehicles that are compatible if they are not, and as a fact, this is what the public really feels, and so if we really need, if it in fact does not reduce the performance of the biofuels, of the engines, then that's something that needs to be highly promoted by the industry. And so it's both ways. I think the not only the manufacturers need to take notice of this and come up with vehicles that would work well, but also the industry needs to start thinking about how does the performance really change, right? As you compare that with gasoline that we use.
Yeah, I agree, especially with the blend wall approaching, and we could use more biofuels than 10%. That would be a great promotion for the industry.
Yeah, and the other thing that I think about is, Helen, that if this was the only thing that was available, then nothing in the market, and we had no regular gasoline that comes from petroleum, then people would be using it. It's the market forces that actually drive people to use something. And so if this was the only thing that was available, right, in a gas pump, then what choice do consumers really have? So that's something that we also need to think about. But if they do have a choice, they're probably going to be, they're fearful of using biofuels.
Okay, looks like we do have a question for you, so this is the audience from Rick. Bob, do you need to interview?
I was just going to say there's a question here from Miku Liu. Yes, from Seattle, and her question, or his, apologize if I'm wrong here, is your literature review published somewhere? It would be great to look at the studies you are drawing from.
Okay. Yeah. There are, we have basically an inventory of currently about 28 different studies from the past. I mean, I think that's what they're saying, right? I mean, the past studies where we are actually really drawing our lessons from, right?
Yes.
Yeah. We have a list of right around 28 different studies, and I don't have it here, but I can send information to them if they can contact me. The list of the studies. My student is actually doing a meta-analysis currently of all these studies, and he would be, very soon he'll be publishing a paper on that.
Okay. Next question is, what suggestions do you have to increase the response rate for online surveys for similar projects in the future?
It's, if we did have like a targeted panel that knows about this and that is interested in this, that's what it will do. But this is generally for consumer surveys. This is what we expect, from 0.5% to right around, 0.5% to right around maybe like 1 or 2%, depending on what is it that we are really talking about. If I was talking about, let's say, an interesting, a topic that is really hot right now, like the health issues, I think I would be getting, my response rates would be high. So, I can only say, maybe better incentives, but again, the people who are going to respond to this somehow are going to be a little bit at least interested in the in the issue that you're talking about, or the survey that you're doing to respond better.
Okay. During the questioning screening process, did you get any feeling for the ability of the respondents to understand the terms biofuel, biomass, bioenergy?
Yes. We had, some part of our survey was blind, meaning we did not tell them about what biofuels or bioenergy really meant, and part of our survey was actually had a definition of bioenergy and biofuels, and we defined it so that everybody knows what it means and is on the same level or understands it in the same way. So we had a definition for bioenergy, biofuels, feedstocks, everything for about 70% of the survey, and for 30% of the survey we actually did some blind tests to see what people really were thinking of.
Okay. One from Ron Farr. He's wondering, how close is bioenergy to becoming a viable reality? And this is in context of meaning infrastructure and processing facilities being constructed, particularly for forest product fuels. That would depend on, the commercial success of the different pilot plants that are out there. So unless we see more examples of commercial success within the U.S. Or within North America, it's going to be very hard for us to say that this is a viable reality. So, I don't know how to answer your question at this point, but I would just say that it just depends on what we see in the next couple of years. I know that your question is valid given so many pilot plant and facilities closing. They opened up and then they couldn't meet their targets, or something happens and then they close up. So it's kind of hard unless and until we really see the success, at least a few successes. It's not going to be our reality. Okay, and here's one from Rick C. Any more insights on the GMO responses? Did you encounter any significant reaction against the use of GMOs? We had a list of almost about 6 or 7 GMO questions in there, and it seems that people are not aware of the genetically modified trees or crops. I think that is the biggest thing that we actually got out of the surveys, but we didn't really see any negative. We actually did not really have like specific questions that looked at negative reactions or positive reactions to it. It seemed from our survey that people just were not aware of it, but our study was not focused on just looking at their reactions to the GMOs, like how did they really feel about using the GMOs or not. So, that's interesting. Okay, Tony Doster's wondering, have you considered a separate sampling of environmental NGOs?
Oh, yes. So we have NGOs that would include both non-environmental and environmental NGOs in our list of group of stakeholders, and we're going to take a look at them. Yes, both of them. In a pilot study that we had done in 2010, we had included about 43 of these environmental organizations in our survey, and we found out that of course they were very negative about the use of biofuels or bioenergy. But in this study we have not looked at them yet, but that is of course one, in the next couple of years we're going to take a look at them.
Okay, Tom Borick and Joan S. are wondering, are you getting similar results in Tennessee?
I'm not sure yet. We are still collecting data from forest and farmland owners in Tennessee, and the consumer survey is just closed today for Tennessee. So we received right around 300 responses from there, also completed responses, but we have not really done the analysis yet. I have not looked at the data yet, so I can't answer your question.
Okay, here's another technical question about the survey method. For the consumer survey, were the web surveys delivered by email, or were there other ways of contacting the participants, phone or mail reminders?
It was all emails.
Okay, thank you very much, Sadipta. Helene, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Bob. Looks like we're out of time. I did put Sadipta's email in the chat window. Feel free to send her an email if you have any more questions. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule, Sadipta, to provide this webinar. I think it was very interesting. I think it just kind of opens a whole nother potential for, to influence or promote biofuels. Where are we lacking, and what are those barriers? So I think you did a great job identifying those, and provided some interesting information for, I guess, our next steps forward. So thank you again. Thank you everyone for participating this afternoon. We will have another webinar in January. I will post that soon on the website. And thanks again. You guys have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you, everyone. Mm-hmm.
Folks, the URL to get to the